The learning and practice of writing is an important section of each literacy lesson, immediately following the 5 steps of reading. The writing section of initial literacy lessons with a new learner typically lasts between 20 to 30 minutes. So why teach writing? Number 1, it is a change of pace. The writing section will give the learner a change of pace and rest from more difficult reading exercises. Number 2, it reinforces learning. Writing a new word helps to make it stronger in the memory. Writing reinforces reading. Number 3, it makes good homework. Writing may form the basis of homework as the learner practices writing new words and sentences at home. Besides writing the new words, the homework can also include copying the story found in the literacy lesson. Number 4, it can improve life. Writing is a skill that may significantly help students to live a more abundant life. Writing skills will enable a new reader to obtain a better job, keep track of earnings, write a letter to a friend, etc. What style of writing? We recommend teaching adults manuscript or print writing instead of cursive writing for these 2 reasons. A, manuscript writing is easier to learn and teach. B, manuscript writing is found in books, newspapers, etc. The same reasons that make manuscript writing easier to learn also make it easier to teach. It uses fewer lines, circles, and parts of circles. As with all learning, the fewer differences, the easier it is to learn. Typically, you will find instructions for teaching writing for Lesson 1 of LEI primers on pages 14 through 16 within your teaching guide. As literacy teachers, we need to show how to write the new words and all the new syllables. In order to do this, we'll need to know exactly how the letters are written. You will find a guide on how to write the letters in the teaching guide and also on the inside front cover of your primer books. Practice writing the letters until you can write them easily and correctly. This will enable your students to be able to know how to write them easily and correctly. The new letters for each lesson are found at the top of the page, and the new words are across the bottom of the page. As a general rule, the student must learn to write all new words and all new syllables. So let's start the 5 simple steps to teach writing. Step 1, the teacher writes the new syllable or word 1 or 2 times in the student's notebook, showing and describing exactly how the word is formed. In a classroom setting, this would be done on the whiteboard or the chalkboard. Step 2, student reads the new syllable or the new word that the teacher has written. Step 3, your student will now copy the new syllable or the new word at least 3 times, pronouncing the word each time that he or she writes it. Step 4, choose 2 sentences from the story and ask your student to copy them, pronouncing each word as they go. And step 5, ask the student to copy the lesson story for homework. So now that we've listed the 5 steps of teaching writing, we're going to demonstrate it on the board to show how that's done. And basically you'll repeat steps 1 through 3 with all of your new syllables and all of your new words. And as a general guide, all of the new letters in the lesson appear at the top of the page, and all of the new words appear in the lesson at the bottom of the page. So I'm going to use Lesson 1 in the Spanish primer as my example, and my new syllables are a, la, na, and da, and then my new words are ana and lana. So I'm going to cover all of the new syllables and all of the new words with my students, going from the simplest to the most complicated. So first, a is our most simple letter. So I'm going to describe in step 1 how to write the letter. A is also a syllable, so here we go. First, I'm going to make a staff below the dotted line, and I'm going to give it a belly. What is this, class? Ah. So here I've done step 1 and step 2 by demonstrating exactly how I wrote the letter and giving them an example and then asking them to read it. I'll give them another example. I'll do a staff below the dotted line here, and then I'm going to give it a belly. And you can do whatever is most culturally appropriate for you. You could say this is a candy cane, this is a staff, this is a belly or a half circle, whatever you choose to do that will make the most sense for your students. And so now I've done step 1 and 2, I've given them an example, I've asked them to read it, now it's their turn to copy it in their notebooks. So you ask them to do that at least 3 times. And each time they write it in their notebook, they'll read it out loud. So they'll write the letter A and say ah. They'll write it again and say ah, and so forth. So now I've done ah, I'm going to go to my next syllable, which is la. So here we go. I'm going to make a line from top to bottom, touching the 2 lines. Then I'm going to make a staff below the dotted line. with a belly here. And what is this class? La. And again, a tall line, a staff with a belly. And what is this? La. So now I've done step 1 and step 2. Now step 3 is again to ask them to write the same syllable in their notebooks, and they'll read the syllable each time they write it down in their notebooks. And I'll go on and I'll do that with na and da, and then I'm going to do it with all my new words. So for example, I'm going to draw a staff here and a belly, a short line below the dotted line, another staff, and a belly. What is this? Ana. So there I've done step 1 and step 2, and I'll ask them also to write the new word in their notebooks at least 3 times, and each time they write it, they'll read Ana. Okay, I would also do that with Lana. I'm going to do it real quick for an example. Tall stick here, a staff below the dotted line, and a belly. And I'm going to pause for a moment because here I'll actually break it down into syllables and ask them to read the syllable as I'm building the word. So in this case, I would have asked them to read ah first and then completed the word. So here I'm going to ask them, what is this? La. And then I'll continue to write the word. A short line below the dotted line, a staff, another staff, and a belly. What is this word? Lana. Okay? So then I'll have them do step 3 by copying the word Lana 3 times in their notebook. Each time they'll read the word Lana as they write it. So that covers all of our new syllables and all of our new words. I'd like to pause for just a moment before we go on to step 4 to note that you might be wondering about the A and why we teach them to write it this way. You have 2 options. You can teach them to write it like this, or you can teach them to write it like this. And it's really up to you. Two guides that we use, we typically recommend this A because that's how it appears in the lessons that you're teaching, and also typically it appears that way in texts like books and newspapers, magazines, and that just reinforces what they're learning to read by writing it the same way that it's being read. But another guide that you could use is if they teach the letter A this way in the schools, then of course you're welcome to follow that standard and teach your students how to write this A as well. So it's really up to you. All right, also I'd like to note that if I'm teaching the word la, for example, when I write the letter L, I don't want to say this is L, read L, or what is this, because actually this letter does not make the sound L, or in this case L in Spanish. When they're reading it, it makes the sound U, which is awkward to have your students pronounce out loud or read. So we always pair consonant with a vowel. So I would not ask my students to read it until I paired it with a vowel here. And then I would ask them, what is this? La. So please remember always that we're not teaching the alphabet, we're teaching syllables. And as they learn syllables, which are just parts of words, they'll learn to build words and they'll learn to read that way. So we want to encourage them to always just read it this way. And we're not teaching just syllables or consonants, by themselves. Always pair it with a vowel. Okay, so step 4 is the sentences. You'll choose 2 sentences from your story in your lesson. So in my case, in lesson 1 of the Spanish primer, one of the sentences is la lana. So I would start by also repeating steps 1 through 3 when teaching the sentences like so. First, I draw a tall line like this, a staff below the dotted line, and a belly. What is this? La. Another tall line here, a staff below the dotted line with a belly, and then a short line below the dotted line, another staff with a belly. And what is this? Lana. Now I'll ask them to read the entire sentence. La, lana. Now notice here I didn't actually break it down syllable by syllable for the sake of time because it's a longer sentence. So when you're teaching the sentences, what we recommend is just to teach it word by word instead of syllable by syllable. That is having them read it out loud. So here I asked them to read la after I wrote la, and then I asked them to read lana after writing lana, and then we read the whole sentence together. Then you'll move on to step 3 with the sentence and ask them to copy the sentence 3 times, and each time reading each word as they write it. Then I'll move on to my next sentence, which is da la lana. So again, I might say draw a tall line and a half circle, a staff, and a belly. What is this? Da. Tall line, a staff, a belly. What is this? La. And then a tall line, a staff, and a belly, a short line, a staff, and a belly. What is this word, class? Lana. And then I'd have them read the whole sentence. Let's read the sentence together. Da, la, lana. And then moving on again to step 3, they'll copy it 3 times in their notebooks, reading each word out loud as they write it, followed by reading the entire sentence. So here we've finished step 4, we've written 2 sentences from our story, and our students have copied it. So now moving on to step 5, that's do the homework, which is copying the story in your lesson. So be sure in your beginning lessons to explain what homework is, what sentences are, what a story is, what it means to copy that. You might have some interesting results if you don't explain what that is. Sometimes your students won't have any frame of reference to what a sentence is, and that's something that we can take for granted, but it's a good tip to remember to explain that. So here are some ways that you can help your student. Number 1, be sure your student is holding his pencil correctly and has the paper in the right position for writing. If necessary, you can guide the student's hand in the early lessons. And many students will have trouble writing, so encourage them to write larger at first. Step 2, always use paper that has lines or ruled paper and explain how this helps to write good letters. Number 3, understand that some students need a lot of help to begin to write. Before beginning the writing section of the lesson, it's helpful to have your student first practice writing circles and then straight lines, up and down, going from larger to smaller shapes. So here's a guide. First, you can write them in the air with your finger like this, going from larger to smaller, and then have them write them in the lines on their paper. Number 4, remember to have your student say the sound of each syllable or word as he writes it. Teach only the sounds and never the names of letters, as we discussed earlier, and vowels may be taught individually, but always teach the consonants with a vowel. Number 5, encourage your student by telling him that in future lessons he'll write his own name and learn how to write a letter to a friend. If your student is very eager to learn how to sign his name, you can go ahead and take the time to show him before reaching lesson 34. Number 6, remember that adults will be most excited about writing when they write things that are meaningful to them. As soon as possible, help your student to write anything he wants to write. Students will gain confidence in writing by writing about themselves or things that are meaningful to them. Their stories can become great materials for post-primary literature. Number 7, remember adults are sensitive about their handwriting and could be embarrassed, so we never want to compare them to another student or to call them out in class. And those are some ways that we can just remember to help our students as they learn to write and to help us be better teachers.